Thank you for watching. My name is Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Govern. Today we're going to be talking about what does a modern political rebellion look like? What makes you a rebel, and what can you do about it? So, sometimes people ask, are we kind of in this modern day political rebellion? And am I a rebel? I don't really view myself as a rebel, maybe, but people ask, and they decide that I just don't like what's going on around me. Something's wrong. I need to get involved, and I'm questioning authority, and I don't know what's happening in my community. So I think the important thing is initially just to recognize the truth of the situation that we're in. We don't live 300 years ago. We're probably not going to be out there in the field like Shays' Rebellion. What we are is we're here in our communities. We care about our communities. We care about our family and what's going on around us. And we may not like what's happening, and we need to do something about it. Now, typically when people talk about rebellion under modern times, they oftentimes bring up this old Thomas Jefferson quote where he talks about how he holds it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. And it's necessary in the political world as it is in the physical, as a storm would be in the physical. And of course, sometimes you hear the Tree of Liberty quote that's oftentimes attached to that too. But when we really are talking about modern political rebellion, sometimes it's hard to take the quotes of our founding fathers and necessarily apply them to what we see around us today. But it's worth looking around us and seeing what is going on. Now, what is not a modern political rebellion are the goofs that dress up in masks and costumes in the street, calling themselves Antifa, just like these clowns, and wearing shields and red flags and posing and throwing fireworks at police officers, or perhaps deciding to burn a pile of plastic in the middle of Portland. This probably seems like an important activity to them, but it is not that productive, nor does it actually move the agenda in any positive or good direction. If you care about your community and the future of your community, you're probably not out there burning piles of plastic in the middle of the road. And you're probably not getting on top of burned out police cars in downtown Seattle, like this photo here, and posing for selfies on top of the car because it's cool and it looks neat and it's great on social media. And after all, trashing Seattle's kind of fun. But that is not what I would view that modern political rebellion is. It might seem cool if you're an Evergreen College student, or more importantly, if you're a professor from Evergreen State College. But generally, for the rest of the world, that's not what I would consider a modern political rebellion to be. But I do believe that there's an element of truth that, and a significant part of being a person who's willing to push back, where you have to speak truth to power. And it's not always just speaking truth to power in the sense of a protest or a march or something like that, although that's, I think, part of it. It's also speaking truth to power just by going to a public hearing and being willing to confront those who are in political power, whether that's your school board or your city council or the legislature or another group of folk like that, that really need to hear from normal people in the community, real people who care about what's happening around them. It's a very, very small fraction of the population that's even willing to take this step. And this is definitely speaking truth to power. And it's something that I believe that anybody who's concerned should be willing to do. Now, of course, that also raises the question of who is the power? And that's important to answer because if you're not able to recognize who the power is, you're not necessarily going to be speaking truth to the right people. And in this case, I'm using a photo of the federal Capitol, of course, in Washington, D.C., and the reality is there's a lot of power there. But of course, I'm 3,000 miles away in Washington State, so it seems like a distant group of bureaucrats and politicians that I very rarely see, and it feels hard to know how to make a difference or impact them. But nevertheless, they obviously are the power, and we need to speak truth to them. But we can also start and do this at a much more local level. So that's part of what power would be. Or it could just be your state legislature that's right down the street or maybe a few counties away. It's a lot easier to get to them and talk to them and find out what's going on and whether they're representing the interests of the community or the interests that you're concerned about. Or even closer still, just down the street, going to your local city hall or perhaps going to your local school board. Places where it's very close, that's very local community sort of decision making that's occurring, and it's very easy for you to go and actually talk and confront or listen maybe for a while and find out just how bad it really is, and then start to confront them and expose what's happening in your local community. On a bigger scale, though, and this affects us all over the place, no matter where we live in America, it's the big tech groups that seem to have decided over the last few years to engage themselves in the political process both censoring what we can say or talk about, also trying to step in and say that certain things can't be discussed and certain things can be discussed. And they seem to have basically hitched their wagons to the political establishment and the political elite, and they've decided that they're going to intervene and become a big part of the power structure that exists in our country. So speaking truth to power would include confronting these guys on their desire to censor and silence and basically modify the communication, the dialogue that we would have with our community and others, using all the tools and the corporate billions of dollars that they have to modify and change what's actually going on in our community. That's going to be speaking truth to power if you confront them. It's our faceless bureaucracy that I have talked about now for over a decade that is actually exercising a lot more power behind the scenes than people realize. And that, well, you may not know their names and you may not know who they are. They certainly like exercising a lot of control and power over what you can and cannot do in your daily lives. And most of this is because the nature of bureaucracy is to perpetuate itself. And that creates a very powerful incentive for them to always grow and bloat their own government, their own little power structure within government anyway. And that ends up creating big government and totally unaccountable, oftentimes even concealed from the elected officials who supposedly are in charge of what's going on in these areas. And inevitably, as part of this power structure, you're always going to have the grant grifters, the government contracts, the people who are making a lot of money off of big government in one capacity or another. This is true even at the local level. Even when you look, it's the homeless industrial complex, it's the green movement or gangrene and the government staff infection that occurs all over America and whatever local communities you're in. Speaking truth to power and exposing the truth about what's going on here, that is a big part of who you're going to have to confront. So what makes you a rebel? What do you do? In this case, you can see here's a protest, anti-lockdown protests from last year in Olympia. And you see people getting together and deciding that they don't like these ridiculous lockdowns or these absurd rules that are being imposed from somebody on high that actually have a direct impact in their community and harm people. Or perhaps you're going to put out your banner that says impeach Inslee or fill in the blank for whatever government or whatever local elected goofball you might have that you're tired of dealing with and you realize that they don't care about you, they're not listening to you, you want to get rid of them. That could make you a rebel. And of course, that annoys those who are in elected office and those who are in positions of power. They don't believe that anybody should have the right to question them because they were elected once, or at least they believe they were elected once, and that just gives them all the authority in their mind to do anything they want to you with no restrictions. That's why we have oftentimes talked about the problem when these elected officials get in there and they think that they should just be king. In this case, I'm applying this story to Governor Inslee, my governor. But you could probably fill in the blank here with your lockdown governor or some of your local elected officials because their behavior is very similar, and that's a big problem. So if you're willing to confront them, perhaps you're willing to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, I don't believe it, I don't support it, that's going to make you a rebel, for sure. They don't want to hear from you. They don't want you to say that anything that they're doing is wrong, and they really don't want your feedback, so you got to give it to them anyway, in any way you can. And perhaps maybe you've looked even closer at some of these other policies and insider kind of incestuous relationships that you have. In this case, we have Susie Levine here, who was the former head of Washington State's Employment Security Department. And she managed single-handedly in just a few months to lose over $600 million to supposedly a Nigerian fraud scheme from that department. They basically sent all this money overseas. It was a one big fraud operation under her watch. That was about as good as managing government could get, and losing just a vast sum of money. It's probably the most at any one point in time that any government agency, it's certainly Washington State history, has ever lost. And recent stories have shown that there are billions of dollars like this that have been stolen or given away through just total egregious incompetence with these local, state, and federal agencies. But according to the Biden administration, he felt that her loss, Susie Levine's loss of the $600 million, was the perfect resume enhancement, and that would qualify her to move up from the JV squad in backwater Washington State and put her in charge of all employment security aspects at the federal level, because you might as well go pro. And demonstrating that you can lose $600 million with no consequences at the state level certainly qualifies you to move up to the federal level and lose a lot more. So failing up, this is a government success story if you're a bureaucrat, and no matter how much money you lose, you're always going to be rewarded and given more power if you're part of the elite establishment. If you think there's something wrong with this, if you think this is not how government should be run, that makes you a rebel. You are definitely a rebel in the modern environment. Or maybe if you look at the homeless projects that we have going on in many urban centers all around the country, particularly on the West Coast. It seems like Seattle and Portland are in a competition to see who can self-immolate their city the quickest and the most dramatically. But regardless, when you see situations like this all over your urban areas, with no accountability and no enforcement, and just drug addict junkie camps spreading and proliferating, and funded and subsidized by taxpayer dollars with the homeless industrial complex, making it very easy for the drug dealers to provide their wares to whoever happens to be stuck in these tents and these terrible living conditions, and bringing along with it all the crime and mental health crises and other problems that just seem to go hand in hand with this explosion of homeless industrial junkie camps all over the country. And if you think there's something wrong with this, that probably makes you a rebel. If you don't think that's a good plan, if you don't want your trails to look like this when you try to walk in the local park with drug needles everywhere and garbage, if you think there's something that's ugly about this or this is a problem, that makes you a rebel too. Here's a photo that was taken just recently by a local news station, Cairo 7 in Seattle, about a homeless junkie camp that was actually on school property right next to the fence where the kids have to walk through to get to their classrooms. They have to walk right by this and play out in this field. And there's drug needles and rats and garbage and fights and open air. They're shooting up drugs intravenously right there, right in front of these kids. And the school district defends this. The school's literally the Seattle school board members think that removing this is not something they should do. And in fact, they think that leaving it is a higher priority than making sure the kids are safe. And that kind of absurdity, if you think there's something wrong with that, that makes you a rebel in the modern environment. Now, of course, the political establishment doesn't want you to blame them, and that's how it goes. And now you look at all this other problem that we're seeing throughout all the urban centers in America, this increasing crime. After all, remember Antifa wanted to defund the police. Sure enough, the police are getting defunded, and you're going to see pictures like this now, more and more, all over communities everywhere. If you're in the elite political establishment, you probably don't see this in your neighborhood. But for the rest of us who live in the real world and actually have people live in the real world, or we have apartments, you live in apartments, or you live in small neighborhoods, this has become a common sign, and along with more violent and more disturbing crime than just this. And it gets worse when you start to attack the police and remove them from their role as peacekeepers and investigators and to see what's going on with crime in the community, take them out of the equation. Shockingly, things don't get better. And if you believe that attacking the police and defunding the police is a bad idea, then that makes you a rebel in the modern times. Perhaps you understand that math is real and you believe in it, that 2 + 2 = 4. If that's true, then you are definitely part of the rebellion, because that is not what our government believes. At least they're demonstrating it with their behavior on a regular basis. At the federal level, they believe that dumping trillions of dollars into completely wasteful and squandered projects is not going to have any impact on inflation or the future, even though they're making your kids and grandkids and generations yet unborn burdened with a debt that nobody can ever pay. That shows that if you think there's something wrong with it, or you think 2 + 2 = 4, then you definitely are part of the rebellion, especially if you actually think teachers should be teaching math at school and making that a priority so that kids actually understand math. If you believe that, you're definitely part of the rebellion too. Today, the modern political establishment believes it's higher priority and more important for them, teachers, and the political establishment that is involved in the public government-run school systems, that they have to teach kids to not what Martin Luther King said about, I have a dream that everybody be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. That is exactly the opposite of what the modern education system, pushing critical race theory and other derivatives of this poisonous sort of political push that they're trying to shove into the education system. They believe that its highest priority is to judge somebody entirely by the color of their skin, content of their character is irrelevant, and in fact, they'll make sure they don't learn any math along the way. If you think there's something wrong with that, you're definitely part of the rebellion, and that makes you a big part of being a rebel in the modern political environment. So yes, you're probably a rebel right now if you think there's something wrong with any of that stuff that I just described. So the question is always, what are you going to do about it? And that's a real important question, because at the end of the day, just thinking about it, just being aware is probably not enough. You have to do something about it. Something good, hopefully, something productive. If you care about individual freedom and the future that your children and other generations have, you have to do something about it. You have to get active. Because if you're not taking action, then you're basically somebody that is having action taken upon you. and you're just sitting there taking it. And maybe you felt that way for a long time. It's probably been going on a long time. The only way to stop it, the only way to start to influence it is to take action yourself. Now that doesn't mean storming the barriers or taking the Bastille or charging the walls. Not like 300 years ago. That's not the idea of being a modern political rebel. Nor is burning a big pile of plastic right in the middle of the street like Antifa seems to like to do on a regular basis. That's really not part of being a productive rebel in the modern political rebellion movement that you're probably going to have to be. You have to be serious, you have to be focused, and there's just a couple of basic things that I believe are worth remembering and being focused on. First, simply start now. Don't wait. It's not going to just get better. Pick your fight. Find something to fight on. Focus local. Hone your skills on something local that's going to matter to you. You find others who agree with you. You'll be surprised. You're not alone. There's a lot of people who are going to care about the same issues you do, and they're going to want to be involved. And once you get together and you get organized, it's a lot easier to do it in a group so that all the weight of this effort's not on your shoulders. Learn how to communicate with your community. Find others who agree with you and work with them to communicate your concerns, both to those who disagree with you, those who are in power, and in addition also to those who maybe haven't made up their mind yet and don't realize that they're a rebel just like you. And I always like to bring up this quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. This has been attributed to Gandhi, and I think that it's a good quote to remember as well. If you want to see change, be part of that change, make it happen yourself, and it will make a big difference. If you're willing to do that, that makes you part of the rebellion. Now, thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about some of the other subjects and topics that we've discussed here, please go to wethegovern.com. If you want to be part of our little rebellion, please feel free to subscribe down below or share this video with somebody else who maybe doesn't realize that they're a rebel at heart, even if they're not willing to admit it openly. And don't forget, the future belongs to those who show up.